Good morning, everyone. Thanks to the SLASSCOM for inviting SLASSCOM to share certain insights about how the industry is and also certain other factors that would actually help you in terms of uh, laying out the strategic plan for the University of Jayewardenepura, University of Jayewardenepura Computer Engineering Department specifically. So what I'm trying to do, I'll try to share certain factors from the industry, as well as like certain other surveys and certain other inputs that came in from primarily from SLASSCOM, but also from certain other institutions, as well as try to do a bit of a glimpse around like where exactly the technology predictions are and all that are in terms of developing the layout, because that also will help out. Myself currently in this place, I'll represent as the SLASSCOM's capacity forum head. The role of the SLASSCOM, as you all might know, it's the industry chamber for IT and DPM companies, where it's primarily focusing on the export-oriented companies. So in the industry, you see there are like 4-5 different industry engagements. There are like 2 different type of these industry chambers. One is primarily focusing on the member side of things. The other one is focusing on the companies. So entities like SLASSCOM is primarily focusing on the companies. So their members are the companies. SLASSCOM focuses on mostly the export-oriented one. FIT is mostly focusing on the local economy. On the other side, we have the employee side of companies. So those are, for example, the CSSL, BCS, IEEE. So all these are individual memberships that you take as a professional. So that two sides also need to be understood clearly. And as I mentioned, primarily like certain things are coming from the annual report, employability skills survey, compensation and benefits, and certain other technology predictions and few other stakeholder inputs. From the IT BPM industry point of view, the goal that is there is laying out for the $5 billion industry. Right now, it's about like 1.8 billion as of last year's stats. There has been a bit of a quite of a down that happened due to primarily the economic situation. COVID actually didn't impacted Sri Lanka in terms of the industry. We've been very resilient throughout the game, but the problems that came in primarily with the local economic conditions, and then also the inflation that happened primarily in the markets like US and Europe has made a bit of a hit in the 2022. In the skilled workforce size, it's about like 144,000 as of now. The target again to skill 2,000 professionals, and then also to have at least about like 1,000 startups who are in the growth stage. Right now, we don't have that capacity. If you go to certain platforms, like for example, Startup SL is the one who's properly tracking the startups. There's about more than 700 startups who are registered in the IT or technology industry, but then again, most of them are not that profitable in certain cases. But the primary goal, I mean, even if you do the numbers, it's about like average, even with a minimum salary of $1,000 per person. So that's where like we have this all this $5 billion industry. And from the SLASSCOM's approach, there's few areas that we are focusing in terms of like how exactly the laydown should be. And given the university is also looking at like how exactly it's looking at its way forward, I think university also can focus on each of these disciplines, given that the required need on the industry. So talent development, that's one of the key pieces from SLASSCOM. There are multiple capacity initiatives that we will also certain center of excellences. For example, for center of excellences in AI, cybersecurity, likewise areas which we see certain need for the country. And then we also need to create really good partnerships, especially in terms of global trade and investments. In addition to the local ones that we create, is as you know, Sri Lanka that has been a mostly industry most people would know for like tea rubber, and even most of our embassies, when they go outside the country, that's the only thing that they promote. SLASSCOM also work quite closely with all these embassies, trying to educate like how exactly they can promote Sri Lanka as IT destination. The local brand that we have for Sri Lanka is something called IOI, Island of Ingenuity. So that's the local brand that we create, just like the Ceylon tea. The IT industry's brand profile is Island of Ingenuity, something that been started for a while and trying to keep continuing. And then in terms of improving the startups and entrepreneurship, that also innovation and how exactly we utilize that again is a key. And then also as the secondary primary key word that now we try to promote Sri Lanka is as a primary green destination. Given that there aren't much of the countries, especially even in the developed countries, that they can't promote that as a destination. We also at Sri Lanka, we have to understand competing with certain other countries in the region, like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and all of these. It's pretty hard to play just the talent game or just the number game. So what we now promote, try to promote Sri Lanka mostly as like a ESG first entity in terms of like how exactly the companies are adapting these practices and all of that. The environmental social governance. Previously, most companies are used the CSR word. Now it's more around ESG. And then how exactly like we can support in terms of policy and legislation. So from the university point of view, also when you are looking at the strategic plan, it's much better that you look at all these different approaches on how exactly like you can penetrate to this. Then I'll touch base on certain reports first with the employability skills survey. Rather than like taking slip notes from certain items, I'll go directly to certain reports at this point itself. So that will make certain things easier. So here primarily, let me first go to the employability skill survey. Primary like this is a survey that SLASSCOM again has done with about like 50 companies to understand what exactly we want to employ from the industry. This is primarily focused on the early career opportunities in the industry, and its primary focus is like the beneficiaries are the undergraduates and the universities. We are conducting the recent survey also, which is ongoing now. As of now, even today, I won't be able to share the stats coming from that because there are certain, and from the data point of view, we actually won't be having data. We directly curate the survey and then like usually like PwC, now they know it, are the one who's actually like creating the report for us so that like the information also are kept in. So in this case, like just want to showcase in terms of like the penetration of the nature of business, there are IT companies, BPM as well as like product companies. From engineering department, I think much better to focus on these product engineering companies is that they are the smaller number that you are creating inside the faculty would mostly go. And that's where the as of a department that has most chance is if you try to compete with certain other areas like software engineering or IT, it's too crowded at the point of it, and even the time that's required to create IT or SC graduate is much lesser than the 4 years that you are spending inside the university. So that is something that you need to be mindful. In the company local side, there are companies which are like 500 plus companies in Sri Lanka. These are the bigger players, and as of a university, making connection with these bigger players is also important. Why they are the one who's actually having most of the very focused university programs. The other people who are like actually targeting, let's say like who are recruiting about like less than 15, 25 per year, they don't have very focused, the university focused program. So as of a university, creating the good rapport with these bigger companies is also important. And then certain other factors, this is a report that you also can like download online. I'll also share all these items in the there for reference. Certain things that we've seen, this is like 21, 22, certain changes, especially around like Gen AI, you wouldn't see here because that hasn't been that of a buzzword back then. But certain areas that we see back then are in terms of like platforms and technologies still continue to be there. And then most of the users are now moving to web applications, to mobile applications. And so if there are any user-based platform, then there has to be certain focus on the mobile application. And then the Internet of Things, we all have been like talking about Internet of Things for so long, but still the predicted numbers hasn't been reached. The reason why it has to be built in a platform where it has to be industrial IoT. The most of the certain cases even from the universities, what we see is a student coming with a small development board which are ideally created for school kids and smaller kids. All these Raspberry Pis, the Arduino boards and all of that, trying to create a IoT solution based out of that only wouldn't actually make industrial IoT possible, and that's why we are not seeing the required penetration in IoT, but the market again is huge. So that again is something that from uni side focused on. And certain other areas that they have seen, machine learning, neural net, blockchain, robotic process automation, RPA. RPA again is now like being heavily utilized. Even most of the local BPM companies are penetrating in this market quite a lot. And to go into this detail, from the BPM again, like as I mentioned, robotic process automation is the more key, and there are like certain other areas, and still like cloud as well as analytics continue to be in a bigger place. So even from a university of point of view, how exactly like you get this bit of hands-on experience on cloud technologies, even by making certain partnerships with the bigger players. We have AWS, Google, as well as others like who are in the Sri Lankan market also. So trying to make that connection, and even like AWS, which has certain university focused programs, yeah, if the university can actually talk with them, there are much easier ways to get certain licenses and all of that. And certain other companies, they are investing in these different areas. This is a local footprint, that's why I'm sharing. AI, AR, and VR again is a bit of area that requires drones again. These are certain things only a computer engineering or more of the engineering background university can focus on rather than generic software engineering. And as of computer engineering department, I think you will have to have very clear focus on like targeting a very specific crowd, because as I mentioned, the IT and the software crowd is, it's too big. And if we try to play in that game, it's a much harder game for the department. As well as like even the areas like cybersecurity. The note on the cybersecurity, yes, we see very big enthusiasm and a very market around it. But then again, we have to understand the nature of what type of roles are getting created. In the cybersecurity, especially in the local market, there are much engineering opportunities in cybersecurity that's been created, because most of the companies, they require cybersecurity now mostly as a uh, legal concern. So on that front, it's mostly like information systems and all of that, where they audit systems and all of that, not in terms of engineering point of view. So this is something that most of the undergraduate are being misled, where they try to focus heavily on the cyber security, and they wouldn't find industry opportunities, especially with the internships and all of that. As of a university also, when we are developing programs and all of that, at the local market itself, this is something that we'll have to keep in mind. Certain other areas, in terms of like certain specific technologies, these are mostly as of a university, we wouldn't encourage on like sticking to any of the framework for the languages. The reason why, if the university is promoting that aspect, it's making a very rigid mind in the students, and it's much harder for them to like move to certain other areas. So even at the curriculum level, what we encourage is to not to have any languages or platforms defined. It's easier in terms of like curriculum updates as well. Then we have very clear certain ILOs around like what exactly we expect them to do, rather than like trying to teach even certain critical areas that we would see as, for example, like C or Java. Rather than having that very rigid, it's much beneficial to have it all. But from the industry point of view, like we've seen a very bigger penetration around like Node.js, Angular as well as React. Angular now is much lesser. So if from a university we are like utilizing these as of any like code courses or anything, React, Spring Boot, and all of that would be really beneficial for students when they are like actually going with the hands-on development. From the machine learning aspect, also one of the biggest problem that we see, there's a really good, and very hype on machine learning, but then again, the problem that they don't understand is the local industry is not actually focusing on the model development. What we want is to solve problems, and specifically from engineering undergraduate, what we expect is to them to have the applicable AI knowledge, not the model development or all of that, which is like a very small segmentation of the industry. And for all these like certain areas that I mentioned. From VPM side, I wouldn't be touching because that's something that not actually is the primary focus of the unit. We also see like certain cloud native languages like Go and all of these are also picking up. Python has been a bit of a bigger hype. Then again, like we need to realize as of a language that's been in the industry, though it's been utilized for all these scripting and all of that, it is not at that higher level. And then in terms of the industry, like the professional side of things, we see majority of the people are actually like coming to the software engineering, but we see very lesser focus in the universities, especially on the quality engineering side of things. Quality engineering has been changed quite a bit over the past few years, and now quality engineers' role is much more engineering than a role that has been before. So there has been like a very critical knowledge as well as certain engineering understanding that's required from a quality engineering point of view also. And then certain other things that we see in terms of like companies hiring, this is I won't be referring to this given that it's a bit outdated. However, this is something that we need to highlight when we check from the companies, the responders that we got compared to previous years. Previous years, mostly like what we hear is this incompatibility in terms of the soft skills. But now, most recently, what we are understanding is about like 34% companies, that's one third saying incompatible graduate technical skills level. This is primarily again because of like students not fully focusing on the fundamental understanding and sometimes only having more of a like a nature around like certain frameworks and few of the things that they actually focus. Yeah, they'll have a little bit of understanding on like making a small product or software, but then again, how exactly they can scale and all of that fundamental understanding is something that they don't have. That again is something that need to be focused from a university point of view. So those are like certain primary items that I'd like to highlight, and certain other areas. I mean, is being given even if you look at like World Economic Forum or even Coursera or LinkedIn surveys, all they are like 2023, 2025, or even 2020, 2030. The skill need, it will always be like these certain skills that like, for example, analytical and problem solving, which is primarily like required from a software or even like computing standpoint of the student. So I'll only focus on that segment on this report, and then I'll also move into another segmentation in terms of like how exactly the global industries in terms of the technological predictions. I'll primarily use the IEEE Computer Society's technology predictions for the 2024, which is like recent release a few weeks back. Here again, certain ideas that we need to focus on. There are like multiple areas, especially around like Gen AI and all of that, but I'll utilize this slide to share the understanding. We see there's a very good, I mean, what as a ABU sees, their chance of like getting these succeed in the year is very high. Things like generative AI even impacting community at large. So these are again like certain areas that we need to focus on. But then again, for example, certain areas like accessible quantum computing. Now there are like different platforms, especially like IBM, Microsoft, Google. All of these players are very good on these areas, but none of the Sri Lankan universities have any sort of program, even as a short course or a additional material that the student can take up on these areas. For example, platforms like Microsoft and IBM, they have their online platform at a certain level elevated, and these are certain areas the engineering student can properly migrate to. For example, like having a good understanding in the maths, especially with the like vectors and all of that, would really make their lives easier in terms of like all the word of qubits in the quantum computing and all of that. Again, even in terms of like when you are developing certain short courses or even small workshops for even industry people, you can't find any course in Sri Lanka at the moment. And then there are certain other areas, for example, regenerative agritech. Even as of Sri Lanka, this is a bit of bigger area that we are coming in. I'll share certain stats later on, and then again, remote health, there, security, 3D printing, digital twins, new programming models, autonomous and hybrid systems. Uh, so these are certain areas that we are seeing. And as of computer engineering university department, having a bit of focus on these areas is really important. The reason being, in a general software engineering degree, most of these areas aren't covered. And now the industries also require more engineers who are compatible with like multiple disciplines for different understandings, because the previous problems that we've been having are mostly solved. Now the IT, I mean, if you think of even the utilization of IT right now, rather than trying to build certain problems or certain solutions only for the corporate, now we see there are like much bigger solutions and effort to solve the other domain problems. So in that way, engineering department can play a huge role in this game. And in terms of like developing short courses or even other materials that would come, including like the undergraduate degrees themselves. Uh, Here again, like if you go to the full report, like you will see multiple areas. I wouldn't go in detail, but again, like good reference material which IEEE Computer Society provides. Yeah, they also like release a annual review also based on like how exactly they see these different predictions succeeding in the last year. So really good matter to check about. And then I'm going to the ITBPM compensation and benefits survey. This is the only survey that you won't find online. Reason being, this is behind a much of bigger paywall. Usually, even from a university, you will be able to get this university wouldn't consider that as like a good investment to pay, for example, about 1 lakh for a for a report. But from a company point of view, like there are different stat that they want, and these like SLASSCOM point of view also, this is like one of like most industries needed survey for SLASSCOM, and it's always getting updated about like every 3 months. The reason why, the moment we updated the release the survey, industries also like updating their salary scales and all of that internally. Certain things, so there are about like last year there are about 65 companies who are participating in salary survey. Certain things that you see, as well as I mentioned, you see in the from the companies who participated a lot, you see in the 2023 there hasn't been much of a growth, year-to-year growth in the industry. Uh, the primary reason, I'll also like come to this later on, but the 2024 is primarily the forecast is a much bigger growth that we are seeing from the industry point of view. And why we also see that in terms of like industry, the another factor that I'll highlight, especially in the IT companies, we are seeing like female participation also now getting a bit higher. Previously, it was much lesser than 30. Now we are seeing about like 35. In the BPM, now it's much more equal participation that we see. And another factor to highlight is local industry right now heavily relying on the people who are graduating and their early careers. As you can see in the survey itself shows about like 50% of the workforce is below 30 years. So that means that's a again like bit of problem that we are also now facing in the industry. But what we see is people who are less than 30 years are the bigger focus group that we have in the local industry. And that's a really good opportunity for university to touch upon, because these are the people who are actually looking at upskilling their careers. And if you think of from the entry point of view, these are certain steps that you already know. For the IT industry, the minimal qualification entry level is about 75%. We see that they require degree, but then again, like we are seeing people who are not even having degrees now come into the industry, and that's getting increased more and more. In terms of the skill side of things, like we require that academic achievements and all of that, but it's not mandatory again per se. And in terms of like the interns allowance and all of that, in the last what we've been seeing about like 25,000, 4,000 range, which is more than the other industries. But this again, like certain companies, there are certain companies you also know about, like who are even offering about 1 lakh salary even for interns. This is like the ballpark average. And then from the opportunities point of view, from the universities and even from the industry, what we see in terms of when the companies are thinking in terms of unique selling propositions to attract talent for their companies, is a very big number in terms of the company culture as well as the technological exposure that they have. So this is what the employees who are graduating are looking for. And if the universities also can focus more on giving that exposure to these people, that will help them in a really good manner. And why that is important in terms of the local companies HR point of view, if you see certain bigger problems that we see in the industry, uh, 83 companies are saying that their attrition is high due to the migration, especially in the middle layer of the company. So there's a really good chance for the companies and the education providers in the Sri Lanka to actually do the upskilling game. And they want to attract experienced talent. They have this mismatch in terms of like the skills in the fresh hires, how exactly they can penetrate that, are different opportunities that the educators can provide on. And on that sector, in terms of like top strategies that we see, is the flexible work arrangement something that the universities can't help, but continuous learning opportunities is a space that the universities can tap into. Because what we've seen, even if you look at most of the master's courses, especially in the year 2023, in terms of the registration, and more than 2023 in terms of 2024, those courses will start. And if you check with other courses, especially like with the other entities like IIT and primarily the Moratua, who are like playing a bit of a bigger game in the masters space, they are getting like very uh, uh, kind of oversubscribed scenario. The reason why those people who are staying here in the Sri Lanka now are thinking of like, if I'm staying here, I'll at least continue my masters. So that has been a bit of a trend that we are seeing now. And if a university can also like fast track on this track and leverage, that's actually beneficial for them in the game. And then on terms of the policy and regulatory side of things, the usual mod is like about Digicon, that's a government's digital economy strategy, which contains like multiple segmentations around the education and certain other areas. So as of a university also, like how exactly you engage with the digital ministry and certain other players who will play in the game. What is the exact unique role that you can play as a department, and identifying that, and even like having that properly on the Digicon 2030 strategy is helping the university, because that will be something that most of the players as well as the investment which is coming to Sri Lanka will be looking at. Primarily, like there are multiple players now coming in the World Bank, even with the ADB, as well as like different other funds that we are seeing, and certain other developments around Port City. So all that is like bit helpful in terms of understanding the landscape. And then AI strategy is something that's been built at the country's level. Yeah, the industry is like quite supportive in the scenario. The primary focus here again is the applied AI things. not actually the research AI that we see more often, especially like with the undergraduate studies. So there will be certain factors that will happen, and focusing on that will also help. And then the Technological Innovation Council and National Innovation Agency, how exactly like to maintain the relationship with them and playing a unique role as a department would be helpful in terms of identifying these sectors. And then educational sector reforms and programs that were recently came in terms of even from a budgetary point of view, there were few factors, for example, in terms of strengthening universities and all, though there has been certain fund allocations even for University of Sri Jayewardenepura, we don't know whether there's any allocations for the department per se. But then again, these are things that you can push and certain benefits can be taken. And we are also seeing government also is pushing more towards getting multiple foreign universities to Sri Lanka with appreciations for the existing universities. Though the state universities, the role that they would play is minor, given that more market is trying to get created around like the other private players and the other stakeholders. There's a good chance for the universities, not only from these different countries. We've seen like heavy development, especially from the Australia. Multiple of their universities starting, whom previously had the local centers. For example, like Curtin had their degree for so long, but now like they are here. Just likewise, EDU and all of them are now here as of their outreach location itself, given that there's a bit of a market dynamics that they see in terms of the cost for any person who's especially in the region, if they actually want to penetrate from the cost wise, even from the outside Sri Lanka, there is a benefit if we manage to sort out certain things in the country. So there are certain beneficiaries that we can see that will happen around the game. And then again, even from a government point of view, you'll see very big focus on the vocational sector. And right now, universities aren't playing much of a bigger role in terms of upskilling the vocational talent. And specifically in the IT segment, that has been a bit of a bigger issue. I'll share a few of the stats later on. That again is something that from the at least policy point of view, though we don't know like whether these will remain on the same front or not, are something that we need to be mindful. And the other factor is given that the education is also trying to like get around certain I mean, right now we have multiple entities who are coordinating that, and it has been a much of bigger, much of a harder game to be honest, especially even in terms of like creating things like the digital transformation policy for education. These are again areas that uni has to be bit mindful in terms of what will happen. On the vocational education, the reason why I touch this again, right now, though we are seeing, so this is kind of like the vocational stream in the Sri Lankan market. And as you see, only very limited number of people are getting selected to our state university system and even the private university system. And there's a bigger portion that actually goes to the vocational segment. But then again, from the IT, ICT sector, the problem that we see in the vocational sector is they are having a bit of a harder time in terms of catching up with ICT. Our vocational sector is quite good. For example, if you ask a person who's doing mechanical side of things in a vocational sector, they definitely be able to like do a very good in the mechanical field. But if you get a vocational person from ICT, they are really bad at even doing a very minimal program. Sometimes like wouldn't even capable at a first year or second year person in the university. The reason why their curriculum hasn't been updated for so long, SLASSCOM and multiple other entities have been trying to like penetrate this engagement, but then again, like the political changes and all of that, it's pretty hard to change the bigger players like ETA, who's like providing most of the courses. And the other factor, the vocational sector is also facing much harder time in terms of attracting proper people who can teach these courses. So with that, the need for the need at the moment is we see there's a bigger numbers coming from vocational sector. I mean, here it says you are seeing about like 40,000 people who are completing ICT related courses. But then again, like from that, you see a majority back then. This is a survey again from 2022, based on like certain numbers we had on 2019. Majority went to public institutions. Public institution now has freeze hiring. Now that portion is also in the pool of the other segment where they also need to figure out private opportunities. So the requirement here is, I mean, if you think of how exactly we as a university can engage in certain upskilling courses for these people. So those can be in terms of like actual proper practical engagements, can be like certain web application or certain courses, focusing on these people who are actually having NVQ level courses, because they right now are facing a much bigger problem in terms of coming to the industry. Not though they have a qualification at a NVQ or a vocational level, that's something that need to be addressed. And universities can play a huge role because they already have certain courses, they already have a way of teaching, they already have the university students. Sometimes, for example, to teach in a certain area like this, you wouldn't even need a lecturer. Even a final year graduate would be sufficient. And if you can make a real good business model around this, there are really good need again in the vocational sector. And then agriculture and agri-tech again is a engineer as of engineering faculty, something that you should be focusing on. There has been multiple effort on agriculture modernization in Sri Lanka. World Bank, ADB has been heavily invested. The newest player is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's like one of the like biggest philanthropic entities in the world are now in the inclusive digital agriculture transformation project. So there are multiple engagements even for universities to engage in different research elements, multiple dashboards that they require in terms of the IDAT program. So that again, especially coming from a university that has multiple other disciplines, you can play a coordination role from an engineering point of view. That will play a bit of a bigger role in this game, because agriculture modernization, as you know, is quite vital for the economic growth in the country. Because if we don't play or if we don't penetrate the agriculture sector, there's no way out for Sri Lanka at this point. And then we also see ESG, even from a government point of view, picking up, but that again is something that most of the universities or from the academic point of view that hasn't been focused heavily in terms of Sri Lanka, like ESG, as I mentioned, primarily focusing to be the green destination. Local companies, we see still majority hasn't been focused, only about like 37 hasn't been focused, but then again, we see most of the companies are focusing. For example, GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, is the most adaptive framework that we see. And most of the companies, especially the bigger players, for example, Virtusa and all these companies are heavily invested in this market. The reason why to attract businesses to Sri Lanka, now it's been vital for the country. So there can be certain areas that do also as a entity can play in these areas. And then based on all of that, I think certain skill gaps and the education alignment, especially from a internal university point of view, what you can focus on is certain few areas based on that details. One is in terms of like having a bit of a more adaptive curriculums at the undergraduate studies. As we all know, especially in the state system, though you get the curriculum update, it takes all together 5 years to get it implementation. Uh, I mean, the best case we'll have it in 3 years, but usually that takes a time. But having the curriculums more adaptive would be helpful in terms of like not having certain fixed emerging areas for certain things, because those are changing quite rapidly, and that will help the universities also to play the game. And also, even the existing curriculums, for example, even with certain universities, I mean, both the state and private, for example, with entities like Sabaragamuwa, Open University, even SLTC, we've done this exercise together where both the industry as well as the university look at the curriculum, not from changing the curriculum review perspective, because that take years. But what we look at is how exactly we can change the existing curriculums to teach certain things or embed certain things. It's we actually have to like dig into the key activities level, and if we identify proper activities, then that is more than enough, and sometimes the curriculum change is not even required to do that activity. So we also encourage universities to engage on that activity at least like about at least every year. If they can, that will be great, because on that manner they can keep the existing curriculum. We, I mean, regulatory wise, you will be safe in that way, but actually provide what the industry or the outer world requires. So, though the curriculum changes and all of that are nice, we encourage universities to play on that game. And then the upskilling, the vocational pathways and all of that, if you can introduce those different pathways, for example, different lateral recruitments and all of that. When you are designing certain courses, if the lateral entry is there, that will help most of the people to upskill, because right now, especially in the vocational sector, you know, we only have one university that's providing them the educational part for all that 40,000 plus people who are coming in. So there's a much bigger sector that as a university can penetrate, and that is the area that money is also in. And then the courses in terms of the open courses, the reason why we kind of suggest universities to have open courses in terms of the brand creation. A really good recent example, I'd say, Open UOM brand that they've been managed to create in terms of together with the DP Education and few other partners. Why that is important? Now there are more than enough things online where people can learn things. But if there are local curated content, you don't have to create everything. If you can curate certain segments, for example, for any area that you would find the expertise inside the department, that create a really good brand attraction to the department, especially in a much larger university like University of Sri Jayewardenepura, whom had computing related degrees for so long, for decades. A computer engineering department would have played a pivotal role in terms of creating that brand image outside the world, both in terms of the student's mind as well as the industry and all of that. So if there are even just one or two short courses or open courses that you can just like deliver through Moodle, those are freely available for anyone. And if you can create a good brand campaign and all of that around it, you will see much bigger talent attraction that happens towards the university and the department. This is something Japura still haven't been playing, but we see following like not only University of Moratuwa, University of Kelaniya, they have multiple open courses now. University of Luna, they have multiple open courses now. Even private entries like SLASSCOM, they do have these open courses, and it's helping them because you are creating a huge talent pipeline that can penetrate the university. So even if you pick up just one area, make a module that's about like 6 week or 8 weeks module, just like a Coursera kind of style, that will make more than enough game, and it doesn't require much of a resources also, because you have all the things like Moodle and all of that sorted. It's just like creating some learning materials where people can learn in a individual manner. And then the industry upskilling side of things, where you play a pivotal role in terms of doing different workshops, can be different short courses, and then lengthier programs like masters and all of that. From the industry point of view, though you can focus on certain things like masters, if you can actually penetrate the game of the middle play, that's much beneficial in terms of the financial gains. For example, even like since there are not much of players in the play, even SLASSCOM now has a separate entity called SLASSCOM Academy, which is primarily like focusing on industry's talent need. The reason why most of the universities are offering either the courses that take too long, about 2 years in terms of the masters, or the short courses that they have are primarily for people who are not in the university, not for people who have graduated from the university. Because most of these short courses the universities are offering are primarily targeting on A-level passed out people or people who are not in the IT domain and all of that. There aren't much of players in the Sri Lanka who are actually focusing on industry talent development. And if you are tap into that field, that again is a really good field to be. And even the certain margins that you see around the profit and all of that are also much higher, especially in terms of these small workshops and all of that. But when you play that game, you have to identify the strategic alliances with relative stakeholders. For example, if it is an area something like cybersecurity, then rather than just the universities trying to engage with something like ISC to risk guard or certain other engage ISACA, some type of engagement. So still having the engagements because they have the resources and the industry recognition, but what they don't have is the learning capacity and learning capability. All these institutions, they want to do certain programs, but they don't know the game. And from the university point of view, you being in the system, you know how to teach, how to do that, and you mastered that game. And we don't see that expertise come into the industry and how exactly like you penetrate that. That is something is a quick money making as well as much more beneficial for the industry also. I'll just showcase like some of the recent things that SLASSCOM did learn. Certain most of these are very small workshops. Sometimes like those are 1 day, 2 day. You can even like decide on even a music place or even like good place like this. Having the Japura closer to Colombo also like have certain other benefits. So if you can actually penetrate, it's quite easy. For example, like generative AI and all these chat GPTs, being a quite of a game, but most of the people actually don't know how exactly they can use it. It's not much harder to like create a 1 day course or 2 day course out of this. And even the prices, for example, for certain of these courses per individual, like they pay about like 20,000 or so. And just do the numbers and you will see how beneficial it is rather invest in a really big effort on a master's program. These are certain areas that you can do short programs, and even from the revenue point of view, you can earn a lot. I mean, we see multiple areas: CI/CD mastery, the smart automation, ISLA, LLMs, certain other areas in terms of like AI-powered strategic leadership for like corporate leadership entities, uh, and certain other areas. These are again like certain areas a university can easily tap into, but when you tap in, make sure that you form proper strategic alliances with the stakeholders in the industry rather than just the university is trying to play. Because if only the university is playing, then the usual market dynamics is okay, they'll teach something that is focusing only on the teaching aspect of not the applicability side of things. But if you can leverage the knowledge and the strength that the university has, this offering a course for university is very easy. I mean, you have all the structure sorted. It's just the right material and the person that's required. Even getting a one person from the industry, one person from the department, and doing the core delivery itself is not that hard game. So that is something that if a university can focus on, then through these open courses, you create a really good brand image, and then you convert that funnel to certain internal programs that the university is having. And the other areas, for example, like all these different areas like industrial IoT, again, the focus is heavily on the industrial IoT, is what we see more often. People only like connecting few sensors and then like making IoT project, but the scale of industrial IoT to be reliable and also to handle that load, those has to be think through, and computer engineering people's skills are really vital on this scale. This, a generic software engineer wouldn't have certain understanding that they have on the electrical, and all of that domain, electronics domain, and wouldn't understand like certain things that they can do on the play. And there's a really good element that they can play. And from the AI side of things, the local universities, I mean, most of the university point of view, the AI that has been taught for a level that the Sri Lanka at this point is not required, and that's why like we aren't seeing much of a penetration. For example, even the people who are just following AI data science masters, they know that they wouldn't utilize most of the things that they learn here. They are just doing the degree for the sake of like having a master's program. But if a university actually can focus more on applied AI, actual from the engineering point of view rather than the science point of view, because right now AI data science is fully focused and taught in a science manner. If we can focus on the engineering aspect of it and how exactly like we utilize most of these bigger APIs and all these services that we can do to solve problems, that will make a really good game. And most of the people, I mean, from entities like Asia to especially like things like Microsoft, they have tools that are available for educators, which they are providing more than enough licenses and all of that, which can actually utilize in the academic environment, and trying to utilize that will be really great. And certain other areas, for example, GPUs are heavily being used right now than even about like 5 years back. Still, you wouldn't find a proper course in Sri Lanka. And if you check most of the people, they actually have a GPU that actually is programmable even in their computers. Is a, for example, like HPC, most of the people wouldn't have access uh, to even to like test all of that. But GPU is something most of the people would have access. You wouldn't find, I mean, it's pretty hard to find, for example, like a CUDA programming course in Sri Lanka. Those are again certain areas, especially, I mean, most of the general software engineering people wouldn't move to these areas given the mathematical complexity of it. Anyone who been in the area of GPU would know like the understanding in terms of like the matrix multiplication and all of that is really important, as well as the computer architectural understanding in terms of the memory management and the IO is really important in GPU programming. And those are certain weak areas the university actually can focus on, because we aren't seeing like much bigger money being created. But if you can like create a really good campaign and programs around these GPUs, these are, even as of the enthusiasts, these are certain things that the people would like to engage. I mean, anyone who do this parallel programming find kind of like interest toward that due to the like certain interest that will come through. So again, like certain much needed areas on the areas. And even as of I mentioned, quantum we wouldn't be utilizing Sri Lanka at this point. But if you look at India, both Microsoft as well as certain other players in India is heavily utilizing. Microsoft themselves has multiple courses around quantum and all of that. These are again like not focusing on the much bigger industry players in the Sri Lanka, because none is using uh, quantum as of now. But then again, for hobbyists as well as people who like to be interested in, these are areas can you can focus on, because pretty sure most of the private universities aren't engaging in this game because they can't find resource people from the industry or other outer way. So the state universities, most of the time, they do have the knowledge in-house, just that most of the time we'll be going with the most of the traditional courses, even in terms of short courses, like they'd go with something like the web application, mobile application, all these different like short courses, rather than focusing on these certain areas, which is unique, as well as a university also can create a brand around it. So if you have expertise in certain areas, then trying to utilize that would be great. And then also how exactly you can utilize the certain other powers of the cloud computing and all of that matters. For example, even the high performing computing, distributing and all of that, though those have been not practical back then, now it's pretty easy for even to university to develop a program around that, because for example, if you are utilizing a platform like AWS, They themselves have learning materials. They have the free credits that they offer, and sometimes even sandbox environments to try out these courses and all of that. So from the university point of view, what matters is get the segment of content and then curate it properly so that the individuals would learn. The reason why most of these, especially the bigger players, I mean, all of them, IBM has IBM Skill Cloud, AWS has their own platform in terms of learning, educate, GCP primarily has their segments in the QuickBooks and all of that alliances. They do have most of the materials, but right now they have too many. And most of the students, as well as people who are in the industry, what they find hard is what exactly I focus on. And also the other factor, if I get a certain problem, how exactly you penetrate it. So the best way you can utilize is curate certain segment of content and then do a instructor-led program out of those curated content. Yes, that's a much easier way to stay in touch because at the end of, let's say, like if we take an example in terms of the cloud computing, at the end of the course, the people would actually like go through and sometimes even get certain certifications even from providers like AWS while they are continuing the program from the university also. So if we can focus on that, that will again like quite a good case. The last other point is the applied use cases side of things. Here again, in Sri Lanka, there are more than enough companies who are utilizing proper computer engineering practices and all of that. For example, if you think of how exactly a company would use FPGAs and all of that in a proper industrial setup, we do have companies like LSCG who are heavily working on that segment. But the biggest problem, even from the university student point of view, they would think, for example, if you start teaching them FPGAs, they would think, do I even use this in Sri Lanka or do I use this elsewhere? If the university can also play a bit of a role in terms of creating these proper use cases and even publish them as certain white papers along with these companies, that will make a bit of a really good material because that's been the area that most of the unis are, and that's a real need because most of the lecturers, I mean, I think you all would be facing, especially in terms of like delivering the elective courses and all of that. We are only using the study materials coming from the outside world, primarily like based on certain US examples. And if we can actually get certain these examples from the local industry to teach in the internal teaching, then that will actually help from the company's point of view, we don't see them like writing the research papers or all of that. You can discuss like how exactly you will be engaging, but how exactly you can get that knowledge and convert that to a bit of academic reference material is something that the university is as capable of. And if you can keep that expertise and even share certain of these things with the support of industry as open materials, that again is creating a really good brand for the entity, especially for the department. Even a small case like if these things, because companies would only have something like, even if they want to share a slide deck or something material, not something that most of the people can actually like get download and learn. Like we all know, for example, for something like operating system, we have more than enough slides that we can download from the internet and utilize in the teaching setup. If we can get these local companies set up samples around like distributed computing, parallel, vision, there's more than enough for every elective subjects that you have in the third year, fourth year. I'm pretty sure you will be able to find one or two companies in Sri Lanka who actually are mastering that game. So that again is a really good area if you can tap in. And And then, as I mentioned, how exactly like you will form the strategic partnerships with the alliances. Primarily, university. I don't know whether the current department has a very focal point in terms of the industry relations or on such manner. If not, it's much better to have that role because the typical role of the CGUs are not actually fully supporting to the need of the IT industry. The career guidance units are primarily created around like most of the other bigger fields. Even if you look at the engineering faculties, career guidance units, it's primarily created around the certain needs that you would see in other fields like electrical, civil, or mechanical, but not primarily around the IT. So if the department doesn't have these elements as of a department focal point, where it can be a career counselor or even like a industry engagement unit or what some sort of entity whom actually is properly looking after this thing. For an entity like University of Sri Jayewardenepura Department of Computer Engineering, it's pretty hard to engage. The reason why, even from a SLASSCOM point of, let's say, we already have signed MOU with computing faculty, even by the time they are starting. So from industry point of view, what Pete says, why can't the university figure out the internal collaboration and trying to hand over it to us? So that will be the same approach even the companies would say. For example, like a company like Cisco Labs would set up something in a specific university. They wouldn't think of like having two labs in one department in engineering and another department in uh, let's say technology. So that's something that as of an internal department, unless you have very focal contact point who's going after this industry, making the brand for the department, it will be really challenging. Unlike most of the other universities in Sri Lanka, this is a unique problem that we are seeing both Kalani as well as Japura is facing right now. Given that they have so many entities that are coming. And even from the industry side, when we try to give opportunities, sometimes let's say like we are doing the industry program and we'd ask universities to like send 5 students. Uh, which department is sending that 5 students is something that we don't get, and the impact and why this matters, the university as a department creating that strategic alliance is important. Otherwise your students are also gauged at the level of all the other students in the chapter. Just the general dynamics. I mean, even you might also have seen the certain stats that I was sharing from the university point of view. When we benchmark, we only ask their university name, not their exact department. Even the university names right now, SLASSCOM, there's about like 100 different institutional lists that we manage. In addition to the state universities and the private institute, there are multiple other companies per se who are providing these things. So that again is something that you have to focus on. And then how exactly you can touch into the innovation and R&D game. Sri Lanka does not have bigger money investing on these areas, both from a governmental point of view as well as from the industrial point of view. Uh, we do have like very few grants, and even if it is NSF or other elements, it's highly unlikely like we get multiple opportunities. We have very rare funding there. Even from the industry side of things, there aren't much bigger R&D efforts that are going. But then again, how exactly you can engage in this space also by encouraging the students internally, and also if there are certain other areas that you can tap into, how you can get those would be really beneficial if you can tap into the area and get the beneficiaries out of it. And once we have those things, that's where, for example, if the department is producing, let's say, just producing one startup alone, would help the outer world to create a really good brand image for the university, even if the certain efforts are mostly supported by the university itself. Because unlike any other place, university is a really good test bed for the any person who's interested in taking that risk. Is I mean, being in the university, it's kind of like risk free. The reason being like they have much bigger support system. They have the internal labs and all of that. And as of Japura, been having, I mean, while you have like certain other difficulties, having all these other departments and all of that also would be help in terms of this R&D. We haven't seen most of the universities utilizing this. Even for example, Peradeniya, you think of like a decade back, though they had multiple entities, for example, even agriculture and computing and all of that, those opportunities weren't leveraged much. But now we see, even in terms of like research activities that they conduct, there's a flexibility even in terms of the final year researchers to engage with the supervisors from other faculties and the departments. Having that flexibility is important, and also then how exactly you can engage in that research. Because that's something that as of a that university that has multiple faculties that you can engage. Because even though we have entities in Colombo, for example, University of Colombo, University of Moratuga, and all of them, they sometimes don't have these other engagement. For example, especially in the fields of the agriculture and related other domains. That is really important if you can actually like penetrate to that segment. And what the hope is like from internal universities as well as like from this exercise that you will taking out, you will have a proper roadmap. And when you create that roadmap, try to align it little bit with certain other roadmaps that we have in the country. The reason only is in terms of the like getting certain funds point of view. You yourself as a beneficiary from the ADB grants know like how exactly like lining these two is how important, because when we have that support and when we can also showcase that we are also aligning with these certain industry roadmaps or certain other ministerial or even the government level roadmaps, sometimes it's much easier to attract these different funds, especially different things are that coming from the other investing agencies, which we also see right now, like there's a bit of an interest, but then again, like in Sri Lanka, we don't have enough back support. There's the government or even like industry body to support, but certain problem, for example, certain even bigger companies, for example, when EYGDS want to set up in Sri Lanka, what they ask is like, are we getting at least about like 100 cybersecurity professionals coming out from universities? So that talent requirement is sometimes that we don't have, even if they want to scale up. Because most of the bigger players, they find Sri Lanka as a bit of a quality destination. We, as I mentioned, we can't play the numbers game in terms of the others, especially with the other regional countries. So it has to be certain quality metrics or certain unique professionals that we'll identify in the field of areas that we are tapping into. So that's primarily what I want to highlight, not mostly the opinion, just like to like share certain factors that we like to see from SLASSCOM point of view. We are happy to engage with the department or like if there are any specific requests, we'll be happy to support. But I like to mention, especially like given the nature and since we've also engaged in most of the other engineering based degree programs, especially with the general, where they have a general entry and then they go to a computing. If you try to leverage only on that path, it's pretty hard, given that even the students that you will come, you wouldn't actually have a control, and you have much bigger conflict with other departments in the faculty in terms of engaging with the computing students and the other students. For example, certain others who didn't have that level of market dynamics at that point would not be that supportive, to be honest. In that sense, from a departmental point of view, if you actually want to succeed, as I think now, even the efforts that you are taking here in terms of like penetrating these short courses as well as masters is a really good direction, and we like to congratulate on that path, and looking forward to see much better things coming from the computer engineering department of University of Sri Lanka. So thank you, and happy to support. You can always connect me SLASSCOM to Lakshmi. Thank you. Any, if there's any questions or any sort, I'll share some of the materials with they also, so that like you can also read most of the materials are also available online. Uh, just a little bit of like certain matrices, for example, like education and all of that, bit harder to find sometimes, but those are being like available online. Any question or so? Not, I finish. wasn't enough. Not anymore. Not anymore in the sense that if you look at the survey, actually, like ICT is carrying out this workforce survey. Uh, it's not only looking at the IT industry per se, but the IT need for the country. That includes certain IT officials that will have in the government or even in other places. The requirement was around like 50,000 per year. We were around like 90,000 in terms of like both the state universities, private, vocational, level that is streamed together. However, that was something that has happened. That survey came in 2019. If you look at the developments from 19 to now, especially the changes that happened in 2021 and 22, uh, with the current level, uh, we aren't seeing the peak now. We are expecting the peak next year. It can have a bit of a sima effect also in 2025 or 2026. Yeah, we see more people, but not that opportunities. It's not the opportunities, it's that we aren't attracting the correct people. The reason being, in 2020, most of the courses, I mean, that's the time that most of the courses started like going online and also figure out they have a way. If you think of multiple programs, for example, which SLASSCOM also engaged with Open University, when they started the Bachelor of Software Engineering, that attracted sign-ups, 3,000 sign-ups. From that 3,000 sign-up, there were 1,800 who actually like were registered for the courses, even followed up with the first year. Though they have 1,800, now we are seeing that being saturated about like 1,100. So that means like from one university, one department, one degree alone. There are 1,000 plus other degrees also, closer to 1,000 reaching degrees, for example, that has been started to penetrate the IT or applied side of things. The SLTC also started this degree in applied IT, which again like have about 800. Multiple other private universities started, and 21 we see bit of like dynamics in terms of utilizing this cloud online teaching and then having a much of a bigger height. Then what happened in 2022, most of the people had hard time with the dollar situation. So with that, we have a much bigger local sign up in the country because most of the people had a hard time. Let's say like though people who actually previously migrated, they couldn't migrate, some of them, and some of them had a problem in terms of like all these dollar problem. So with that, they also started the local degrees here in Sri Lanka. The reality is unless they actually have a proper migrate pathway, if you actually want to penetrate to a other country, you at least need a MSc or at least about like 2 3 years of experience. So we anyway see that segment of people are in the country at least for about like 2 3 years, unless they do a master's program or if they apply for masters or doing a local program in for an industry engagement. The other factor is especially around like these when the changes around the dollars and all of that came, we also saw most of the people who are genuinely interested in following IT and all of that, but just following that because that's where the money is in terms of the salary. So that also we are seeing a bit of a bigger peak. So right now, at least what we are seeing is like much bigger effort. But then again, if you think from the, I mean, that's the same problem that most of the even certain established universities, I don't know whether even the department faced this situation in terms of the last 2 quarters, in terms of internships. Most of the companies who are oriented on export markets, they had a very less number of internships because they have a hiring freezes, uh, which we expect that like in the this quarter and the next quarter, most of the things will gradually decrease. But the number that we'll have in 2025 and even latter part of the 2026 might be bit overwhelming unless we see most of the bigger players again start playing. The reason why, for example, like for the saturation that we noticed last year, uh, those who were in the much bigger hiring places, for example, entities like Virtusa, they were in 1,000, about 1,500 as I recall, to increase that count. Once they are only halfway through, they got the different other market problems, and then they freeze that cycle. Certain other players who actually wanted to like play big, for example, HCL, they want to come to Sri Lanka as well as EYGDS. So all of them, they had a much bigger uh, games. For example, EYGDS, you might have noticed, and certain other different players also came in. They even requested smaller companies to join with them. The reason why most of the Sri Lankan companies, it's not big enough to even to present to a certain global bigger business. So that we see, I think, in the years to come, it will grow. But, from a university departmental point of view, I think like there are different other aspects that are coming in, and only trying to like the graduate, undergraduate count is not that helping, in my opinion. And even from a departmental point of view, given that the boundaries that you have from the UGC, you would double the count at maximum. And that right now, I think it's about like 50, 60. Even if you double it, it's 120 and no one even would notice. So this is the same problem that the Moratua, Peradini, all of them have in terms of facing the undergraduate. There are, I mean, even most of the established universities face that problem given certain value. And the other factor, the expectation from the students is also a bit different. Unlike with, for example, if you think of an internship in a civil or a mechanical engagement, the expectation of a student is that they go to the internship, learn and get that sorted. But now in the field of IT, from the internship itself, it's around the higher salaries and how prestigious the company is and all of that. From the company point of view, especially given the considerations around like the mid-tier, certain people in the mid-tier leaving, companies are facing a bit of a hard time properly focusing on the interns. That's why most of the companies are asking like, give us people who have a bit of experience. I mean, even right now, if you go to the market, there's more than enough for people who have 2 years plus experience. Why they don't have to train? Is the training cost, even like by the time that we were checking the SLASSCOM survey before the economic situation, for training cost alone for a company usually is about like more than 50,000 back then. So considering the current cost, then it's about like 1 lakh. That's the cost alone without like the salaries and all of that, because there has to be a seasoned people who are in the industry who had to look after their, and that cost a lot for the companies, and that's why we are seeing a bit of a lesser thing. That again, how you can change again by the university also. I mean, in the current curriculum, if you don't have focused programs in terms of focused industry mentoring or something like that, trying to one trying to create one-to-one mentoring doesn't actually properly work with the universities when you try to like make that in a bigger scale. But for example, like you get the five students and then having a group mentoring, but internal university does the proper tracking. The problem with the industry and student alone the contacts is sometimes the students leave out the conversation. Sometimes the industry people get this busy and then they just go with the conversation. So the university has to have a proper touch point with that mentoring. If you can ask them to like maybe based on that conversation, they do a presentation. Uh, some sort of thing that will make at least like the basic element. And then the project element also is something that has to be really good. I also kind of like highly look at curriculum point of view. I think most of the things have changed as you mentioned. Uh, Bit of a focus has to be taken in terms of giving them projects early on, though they don't have the necessary skills. The problem with most of the curriculums is we see in the especially with the engineering programs where they come to the discipline only in the second year. They'll learn certain things in the second year, and only in the third year the projects will come. Uh, so sometimes the students don't have the confidence that they can build something up until they come to the second year. That has been a bit of bigger problem. So what we try to ask universities, even though you don't grade, or even if you have very light mechanism, let them get their hands dirty so that they will be a bit of a confidence that they can build something. Anything else? In the interest of time, then I think I can, Thanks again for the opportunity.